Imagine standing at the altar, gazing into the eyes of the person you believe is your soulmate. The vows you exchanged still echo in your mind, promises of fidelity, trust, and eternal love. This is the moment you've been waiting for. A day wrapped in white dresses, champagne toasts, white dresses, champagne toasts, and congratulations. It's the picture of a fairy tale. But beneath that perfect image, a shadow lingers. As the night falls and the celebration draws to a close, there's a growing sense that something's not quite right. The bride, with her mind spinning from the day's excitement, notices it first, a glance, a whisper, a feeling, but she pushes it away. After all, it's her wedding night. Tonight is supposed to be perfect, but perfection can be deceiving. The new husband, charming, handsome, seemingly devoted, disappears for what seems like a moment too long. He had promised her the world, hadn't he? Promised her a love that would last forever. And yet, as the night deepens, doubts begin to creep into her mind like unwelcome guests. Where is he? What could possibly be more important than his new bride on their wedding night? And then her sister, her best friend, the woman she grew up with, who stood by her side not just on this day, but through every great moment of her life, the woman she trusted more than anyone else in the world, until that night. It's in those small moments, those fleeting, almost imperceptible cracks in the facade of happiness, that the bride realizes something is terribly wrong. She can feel it, an invisible thread pulling at the edges of her consciousness, warning her, whispering that her perfect life is about to unravel. But how could she have known that when she decided to search for her husband that night, she wouldn't just uncover an affair, but a betrayal so intimate, so devastating, that it would tear her life apart in the most unimaginable way? How could she have prepared for the gut-wrenching scene she would walk into, her sister and her husband, entwined in a moment of passion, shattering the vows they had sworn just hours earlier? The rage she felt, the heartbreak. How could she have known that this betrayal wouldn't just break her heart, but would lead to something far darker, far more tragic? Because in the wake of that discovery, something snapped. And as emotions spiraled out of control, a deadly confrontation erupted that would leave one person dead and the lives of two families changed forever. But how did it come to this? How did such a seemingly perfect night descend into chaos and violence? Let's go back to the beginning, to the events that set this tragedy in motion. To understand the full gravity of that night, we need to go back to the very beginning of this twisted tale, back to when the bride, the husband, and the sister were just characters in a story that seemed to be about love, family, and happiness, before the betrayal, before the bloodshed. Our story begins with the bride, Emma, a young woman full of life, known for her kind heart and loyalty to those she loved. She had always been close with her sister, Olivia, 2 years apart, but inseparable, like best friends. Growing up, they shared everything, secrets, dreams, even clothes. They were the kind of sisters who could finish each other's sentences, who always knew what the other was thinking. To Emma, Olivia wasn't just a sister. She was her confidant, her protector, her closest ally. And then there was Jack, the man who would become Emma's husband. Jack was charismatic, successful, and the kind of man who could light up any room he entered. He was everything Emma had dreamed of in a partner. From the moment they met, there was a spark between them, a connection that seemed destined. Emma fell hard and fast for Jack, believing that he was the missing piece in her life. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Within a year, Jack proposed, and Emma, overwhelmed with joy, said yes without hesitation. To everyone who knew them, they seemed like the perfect couple, the kind of couple that people envied, but there were whispers, quiet doubts that Emma brushed aside, whispers that perhaps Jack wasn't as perfect as he seemed. And then there was Olivia. Olivia had always been the more outgoing of the two sisters, the one who commanded attention effortlessly. People were drawn to her energy, her magnetic charm. But beneath that charm, there were signs, subtle, almost invisible, that perhaps Olivia's feelings toward her sister's fiancé weren't as innocent as they appeared. As the wedding day approached, tensions began to simmer beneath the surface. Emma, lost in the whirlwind of planning her dream wedding, missed the subtle exchanges between her sister and her fiancé, the stolen glances, the lingering touches, the shared secrets that weren't meant for her ears. But on the day of the wedding, none of that seemed to matter. Emma was radiant, her heart full of hope for the future. Jack was at her side, promising her the world, and Olivia. Olivia was right there too, standing proudly as the maid of honor, smiling as though everything was exactly as it should be. But in the shadows, something dark was brewing, because by the end of the night, those smiles would fade, and the truth, ugly, painful, and deadly, would be revealed. The year was 2019. The place a small town nestled in the hills of upstate New York, a town where everyone knew each other, and secrets were hard to keep. The wedding took place at a grand estate, surrounded by lush gardens with the kind of serene beauty that made it the perfect location for what was supposed to be a day filled with love and celebration. The day itself had been nothing short of magical. The ceremony was flawless, the reception filled with laughter and heartfelt toasts, the kind of wedding that guests would talk about for years. Emma had been glowing, her white gown flowing as she danced, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond her reach. The last place she would have ever expected betrayal to unfold was on her own wedding night. As the evening drew to a close, the guests began to trickle away, leaving Emma and Jack alone in the sprawling estate they had rented for the night. The soft sounds of the band playing their final song echoed in the background as Emma began to feel the weight of the day settle in. She looked around for Jack, ready to embrace their first night together as husband and wife, but he was nowhere to be found. At first, she thought nothing of it. Perhaps he had slipped away for a moment, overwhelmed by the excitement of the day, but as the minutes ticked by, something didn't feel right. Emissaries darted around the room, no sign of Jack. The once comforting warmth of the evening began to feel cold. Unease settled in her stomach as she glanced across the now empty dance floor. And then there was Olivia, her sister, who had also vanished. Emma hadn't seen her since the final dance. A sinking feeling began to gnaw at her, but she brushed it aside. It was her wedding night, after all. Surely there was nothing to worry about, but the nagging sensation wouldn't leave her. Where had they both gone? Why wasn't Jack with her? The mansion they had rented for the evening was large, sprawling, with many rooms, perfect for getting lost in. Emma, suddenly unable to shake the growing dread, decided to go looking for her new husband. Maybe he'd stepped out for a moment to clear his head, she thought. Or perhaps he and Olivia were together, making sure the final details of the wedding were wrapped up. But as Emma moved through the dimly lit hallways of the mansion, the unease tightened its grip. Her steps echoed in the stillness, each one a reminder that something wasn't right. The house, once a place of joy and celebration, now felt eerie and unfamiliar, the silence stretching endlessly around her. And then she heard it, muffled voices, a soft, nervous laugh, Olivia's laugh. It was coming from the far side of the mansion, behind a door that led to one of the secluded guest rooms. Emma's heart raced. Why was her sister here? Why weren't they with her, celebrating what should have been the happiest moment of her life? As she approached the door, her breath hitched, and for a moment she hesitated. Should she knock? Should she walk away? Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But something inside her, something dark and insistent, pushed her forward. She turned the handle slowly, the door creaking open as if time itself had slowed down, and what she saw inside that room would change her life forever. What Emma saw was more than just an affair. It was a betrayal so deep, so personal, that it would shake her to her core. There, in the dim light of the guest room, was her husband and her sister, entwined, tangled in each other's arms, oblivious to the world outside that door. For a moment, Emma couldn't process what she was seeing. Her mind refused to accept it. This wasn't happening. Not now, not here, not with them. But the truth was undeniable. staring her in the face like a cruel, unrelenting nightmare. Her husband, the man she had just vowed to love and cherish for the rest of her life, was betraying her with the one person she trusted above all others, her own flesh and blood. The room seemed to spin around her, the weight of the moment pressed down like 1,000 bricks. She felt dizzy, her heart pounding in her chest, tears burning in her eyes. Her body froze, caught between the urge to scream and the crushing agony of betrayal. How could this be happening? How could her perfect life be crumbling before her eyes on the very night she thought it had finally begun? And then, something inside, Emma snapped. She stormed into the room, her voice shaking, her hands trembling as she demanded an explanation. The shock on Jack and Olivia's faces told her everything she needed to know. They had been caught, red-handed, guilty, exposed. The excuses and apologies began to tumble out, but none of it mattered. Nothing they could say would erase what had just happened. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a betrayal so profound that it could never be undone. What followed was chaos, a blur of words, of accusations, of tears. Emma's pain poured out in a torrent of rage and heartbreak. She felt like a stranger in her own life, her reality crumbling beneath her feet. Jack begged for forgiveness, Olivia sobbed, but there was no going back. Emma's world had been torn apart, and there was no way to put it back together. The room exploded with emotion, raw, unfiltered, and destructive. Emma's heart raced as anger, disbelief, and betrayal clashed violently inside her. Her once perfect wedding night was now the darkest night of her life. Jack stood there pleading for forgiveness, his voice shaky, his face pale. Olivia, her sister, sobbing uncontrollably, begged Emma to understand, to believe that it was a mistake, that it hadn't meant anything. But how could it mean nothing? How could this be a simple mistake when the two people she trusted most had shattered her heart into a million pieces? Every word Jack and Olivia uttered was like a knife twisting deeper into the wound. Emma's world had become a whirlwind of confusion and rage. Her vision blurred, her mind raced, and all she could think about was how everything she knew, everything she had believed in, had been a lie. The argument escalated. Voices grew louder, more frantic, as accusations flew across the room like daggers. Emma, trembling with rage, lashed out, her voice shaking with fury. How could they have done this to her on this night of all nights? The tension in the room was unbearable, suffocating. Jack tried to move closer, to calm Emma down, but every step he took only fueled her anger. Olivia, still sobbing, tried to defend herself, but her words fell on deaf ears. There was nothing she could say to undo the damage. And then, in a moment of desperation, Jack made a terrible mistake. He reached out to Emma, trying to grab her arm, trying to pull her back from the brink. But his touch was too much. It sent a shock wave of betrayal through her body, igniting a rage so intense that it blinded her to reason. Her mind went blank, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat of fury. What happened next was a blur. One moment they were shouting tears, anger, accusations, and the next the room fell deathly silent. In the chaos, someone reached for something, a bottle, a lamp, a nearby object. It all happened so fast, too fast for anyone to think, too fast for anyone to stop. And then there was blood. A single devastating moment, a moment where everything changed, a flash of violence, and the air filled with a silence so heavy, so final, that it seemed to press down on the entire house. Jack collapsed. The room once filled with rage was now frozen in horror. Emma stood there, her body trembling, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Olivia screamed, a piercing, guttural cry of shock and disbelief. The walls seemed to close in, the night spinning into a dark, surreal nightmare. Jack lay on the floor, motionless. The man she had married just hours earlier, the man who had betrayed her, was now lying in a pool of his own blood. The weight of what had just happened began to crash down on Emma like a tidal wave. Her hands shook as she stared at the scene before her, unable to comprehend the tragedy that had unfolded. The betrayal, the rage, the heartbreak, it had all culminated in this, in a moment of violence that none of them could take back. For a moment, everything was still. The reality of what had just happened hung in the air like a thick fog. Olivia knelt beside Jack, her hands covered in blood as she screamed for help. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The betrayal that had torn them apart had now claimed a life. Emma, standing frozen in shock, could barely move. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the night over and over again. But it all felt distant, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. How had it come to this? How had her wedding night ended in murder? The once grand estate that had been filled with love and celebration was now a crime scene. The police were called. Sirens blared in the distance, the flashing lights casting a glow on the mansion's stone walls. Emma didn't resist as they arrived. She couldn't. Her mind was numb, her heart broken. She barely registered the questions, the flashing cameras, the tape being placed around the scene. The investigation began immediately. Officers moved through the house, collecting evidence, speaking with witnesses. Olivia was hysterical, unable to explain what had happened, her sobs punctuating the still night air. Emma, in a state of shock, could only sit in silence as they led her away from the scene. What had started as a dream had turned into a nightmare. Emma's wedding night, once a symbol of hope and love, had become the stage for a tragedy no one could have foreseen. And now, with Jack dead and Olivia broken, there were no winners in this twisted tale of betrayal and murder. Only victims. The investigation that followed would attempt to piece together the events of that fateful night. The police collected every detail from witness statements to forensics, trying to make sense of the sudden violent outburst that had turned a wedding night into a crime scene. Emma was taken into custody for questioning, but the truth of what had happened wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. Was it an accident? A moment of blind rage? Or was it something deeper? Something more premeditated? The courtroom months later would be filled with conflicting testimonies. The defense argued that it had been a crime of passion, a momentary lapse in control brought on by unimaginable betrayal. They painted a picture of a woman pushed to the edge, betrayed by the two people she loved most, unable to contain the fury that had built up inside her. The prosecution, however, saw it differently. They claimed that Emma's rage had been boiling for weeks, that there were signs, small, almost imperceptible, that she had been growing increasingly suspicious of Jack and Olivia's relationship. They argued that Emma had known on some level about the affair long before her wedding night, and that this knowledge had festered inside her, leading to that fatal moment. The verdict came down, but no matter what the outcome, the damage had already been done. Emma's life, Olivia's life, even Jack's, none of them would ever be the same. In the end, this was more than just a story of love gone wrong. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily our lives, our relationships, can spiral out of control when trust is broken. A reminder that betrayal, once revealed, can have consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. As the dust settled, the tragedy of that night left a mark, not only on Emma and Olivia, but on everyone who knew them. This wasn't just about a single act of violence. It was about the tangled web of trust, betrayal, and shattered relationships that led to that fatal moment. A moment that turned what should have been a celebration of love into a nightmarish descent into darkness. The courtroom verdict, though final, could never bring closure to the deep emotional scars left behind. Emma's actions, born from a place of pain and betrayal, had ended a life, destroyed a family, and left the community grappling with the aftermath. People who had celebrated with the couple just hours before were now left questioning everything. How could something so horrific happen to two people who had seemed so happy? For Olivia, the guilt was unbearable. Her relationship with her sister, once so close, was forever torn apart by that single night. And though she survived physically, the emotional toll of watching her sister and her lover fall apart in front of her would haunt her for the rest of her life. And as for Emma, The woman whose life had unraveled so dramatically, what became of her? Depending on the legal outcome, she either faced years behind bars or walked free with the weight of her actions on her shoulders. Either way, she was trapped in a prison of her own making, one where the memories of her wedding night would replay endlessly. A reminder of everything she had lost, but perhaps the most chilling question remains. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Could there have been a way to stop this spiral before it reached its deadly conclusion? There are no easy answers, and perhaps that's what makes this story so compelling and so heartbreaking. It's a stark reminder of how fragile the bonds of trust can be, and how quickly love can turn to hate when those bonds are broken. Ultimately, this story is not just about a murder. It's about the dangers of deception, the destructive power of betrayal, and the uncontrollable force of emotions pushed to the breaking point. It's about how, in an instant, our lives can change forever. As we close this chapter, we are left with a haunting question. How well do we really know the people we trust with our hearts? And when betrayal strikes, how far would we go in the name of revenge or in the name of justice? Thank you for being with me until the end of this video. If you like true crime videos, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the videos I post every day. Thanks to all of you dear ones.